I had these experiences in 2014 and 2015, and I was 16 and 17 years old. Although I no longer live in the house that these events took place, and the room described is currently my brother's, I will refer to it as my room and set the scene as it was during the experience, which I believe to be paranormal. My whole family has had a number of odd things happen around the house, and the following 2 stories are things that have happened directly to me, and I sadly have no one to back them up. I do believe in the paranormal, but I also value logic and critical thinking more than silly beliefs, so I always try to find a logical explanation at first. For the following, though, I have none. Also, I wish to say that I don't smoke marijuana or use any type of medication or drugs that would cause hallucinations, and schizophrenia does not run in my family. Alcohol also doesn't have any role in the following stories. So, we live in a rural area in Finland. There has been no tragic accidents or deaths that we know of, and no one plays with Ouija boards or jokingly summons things. Our house was built in the 70s or 80s, I think, and behind it there's a massive forested area where I used to love taking walks every once in a while, and on both sides of it were some fields. The house has 2 floors and an underground basement. On the ground floor is the entrance hallway, and after that on the right is a stairway leading upstairs. After that, a door to the basement. At the end of the hallway is the dining area, the kitchen, the living room, and 3 bedrooms. One belongs to my parents, one to my eldest brother, and one is shared by 3 siblings. The stairs that lead to the 2nd floor haven't been lit for years because it's difficult to change the light bulb there. I don't think it's been lit in 6 years, but it doesn't bother us. We don't need it. Once you've reached the top of the stairs, you enter my sister's room. In my sister's room was also the door to our attic. On the right of the main doorway is her bed, TV and couch, and on the left is the doorway to my room. There has never been a door, so my sister could see into my room from her bed if she wanted to. My room is a bit bigger than hers, but the ceiling starts to decline at one point, making it seem smaller than it is. The layout of my room isn't really crucial, but because of the ceilings I have placed my bed in the far corner of the room, also so it's not visible from my sister's room. In front of the bed I have a TV, and on the opposite wall from there is a row of built-in closets. They haven't had doors on them for years. Some had fallen off because I'd slammed them, and others had fallen when I was a kid, as we used the doors to climb on to get to the top of the closets. It was the best place for a hide-and-seek game. One day around 5 p.m, I was laying on my bed reading a book. I was lying on my stomach and the book was propped up against a pillow. I was really into this book, and suddenly I heard this loud, rapid tapping sound in the wall directly next to me. Startled, I stopped reading and stared at where the sound was seemingly coming from. There was a tapestry on the wall that was this awful yellowish orange that changed into old green. I figured that it had been a mouse or a rat scattering around inside the walls, and because the sound was so sudden, I had magnified it in my head, or maybe it echoed in a weird way. My heart was pounding fast, but I was able to calm down and get back into my book. I liked reading immensely when I was growing up, and sometimes I was able to tune out my mum's calls, so I guess it was a really loud sound. I had read maybe half a page since I heard it, when it happened again. This time it wasn't just a brief sound, but a strong, louder lasting one. The only way I can describe it is that when you're tapping on a table with your fingers, not your nails, in a bored manner, and you find that specific rhythm, tapping that goes pinky, ring finger, middle finger and pointer finger over and over. That sound, except that it was next to me and was louder than humanly possible. This thudding, violent tapping soon seemed to multiply, and it was so loud it really couldn't be mice or rats. After a second or two, the sound started to move around the walls. It circled from next to me and along the walls until reaching the door between our rooms and continuing around my sister's room, all the while growing louder, and still, somehow the distance didn't seem to matter to the volume at all. Now if it had been rats, they would have had to go around or through the attic, which should have muffled the sound to the point of being barely audible, and should have had to at least stop when reaching the doorway that leads downstairs. The sound didn't become muffled. The sound didn't stop proceeding when the doorway came to stop the route. The sound continued through it and jumped back into my room and back to the very starting point. I remember being horrified. I followed the sound with my eyes. I don't think I took a breath as it circled and I was frozen into position. Eyes wide open and tears starting to form, I didn't make a peep. I couldn't react at all to what was happening, and when the tapping finally stopped, I don't remember going downstairs. All I remember is not staying up there. When this happened, I was roughly 16 years old, and had never had any experiences this terrifying. Some months later, though, I had my second experience. I was again laying on my bed after school. I wasn't tired and was lying on my side watching a DVD. My back was towards the wall, and if I'm not mistaken, I was watching a Sherlock Holmes movie, but it could have been something else as well. I had had a rough week with tests every day, and had decided to relax a bit before hitting the books once again. I cannot stress this enough, I was not tired at all. I was not sleepy, and I was wide awake. I suddenly felt this light pressure on my mattress near my feet. The pressure then grew more heavy and started to move, as if a human was crawling on their hands and knees, up the bed and towards my head. Slowly the hands moved one after the other, and legs moved after them. Whatever it was so careful as to not wake me up. I heard no shuffling of the duvet or sheets. There was absolutely no sound at all. My breath hitched and I was so confused on what it could possibly be. I swear it wasn't a cat. The weight was divided into 4 parts, so far from each other that a cat or even 3 couldn't have done it. It wasn't a dog either, because a dog would be fussy, loud and awkward, and would trample me. Also, I would have seen a dog get past me, as a cat could have gone under the bed and jumped from the side my feet were. Once the alleged hands were where my head was, and knees somewhere around my lower back, I had to concentrate on not turning around for the sheer weight of the thing or creature behind me. Another reason why it couldn't have been a cat. A cat couldn't turn me over for the weight of it. The thing started shifting its weight between hands and knees, just swaying for a while. My eyes were glued to the TV, not seeing it and only thinking, what the fuck is going on? I concentrated so much on not turning around you'd be surprised. I heard no sounds. I breathed in a shallow breath, but it didn't breathe at all, or not so that I could hear it. It continued on swaying, and for an unknown reason, I became very irritated by it. I remember thinking that there had been so many paranormal things happening throughout the years, from my siblings seeing things, my mum experiencing the weirdest electrical problems, and other strange occurrences, that I soon became very angry. I was so sick of things not being normal. I was angry for not understanding, and without thinking at all, I swung my hand at it. I swung my whole arm in a large half circle toward the being, wanting to hit it, wanting to force it to acknowledge me. It's just that I didn't hit anything. I swung at empty air, and that is when the fear kicked in. I could swear that the air was a tiny bit colder in that spot, but I'm not sure. I met nothing and sat straight up, looking around, wishing and also fearing that I would see something. I started thinking, what if I had hit something? What would I have done? I turned off my TV and went downstairs. I wasn't struck with paralyzing horror this time, but I can't figure out why I had swung at the thing. I'm not a violent person. Last time I was in a fight was when I was 11, and it was with my sister for some stupid reason. I had never intentionally hit anything or anyone, and that freaked me out a bit. After that, I had no personal experiences of the paranormal. But to be fair, I had moved away 1.5 years or so ago. I know these stories or experiences sound unbelievable, but I swear they did happen. I tried so hard to find a logical explanation, but couldn't. I guess we're not meant to know everything. Thank you for reading this, and have a safe night. I've just recently moved into a new house. I wouldn't describe it as being in the middle of the woods, but it's not far off. Aside from the house being a bit junky, house market and all that, there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't until a few months of living here that I started noticing strange little things that I couldn't explain. The first and most notable thing that happened was the strange disappearance of a rock. And when I say rock, I'm not talking about a driveway pebble. I'm talking about a fairly sizable rock that sat in my front yard that could have easily weighed 100 pounds or more. I never really paid much attention to its existence. Who would? It was just a random yard decoration, likely placed there by the previous owners. When I moved in, one of the first things I noticed was the yard was absolutely covered in fuzzy little caterpillars called woolly bears. I hate killing things, even bugs, and I didn't want to accidentally step on any of these little guys, so I took it upon myself to collect as many as I could find and move them out of the way across the street, where they could live their best buggy lives. One day during my daily woolly bear collection, I noticed about a dozen of them had collected around this rock in my front yard. I had never seen so many in one place. Usually they're scattered throughout the yard by themselves. I collected them all and moved on about my day, not really thinking anything else of it. Later that same day, I stepped outside to have a smoke. I usually sit on my front porch or wander around the front yard a bit while I puff on my cigarette. It didn't dawn on me at first, but when I was almost done with my cigarette, I slowly realized that the rock I had gathered the woolly bears off of that same day was gone. All that was left was a circular footprint where it had been. This was certainly strange, but nothing more than that. There was a bit of construction going on down the street, and I figured maybe the construction crew had taken it for some reason. It still doesn't make a lot of sense. There are plenty of these rocks around. There's no reason to take one from someone's yard, but perhaps they needed one to fill something in. I later learned that they were putting in a driveway for the house down the street, and I really don't see why they would need a rock for that. I let it go and didn't pay much more attention to it until a few months later when I realized that leaves weren't covering the spot where the rock had been. It's autumn and I'm surrounded by trees. Leaves are covering the yard, but not that one spot. I took some pictures and you can easily see where the rock had been. The spot is about 35 inches across, has dried out and is surrounded by leaves. At first I thought maybe an animal was using it as a bed, as there are plenty of deer, bears, foxes, raccoons and coyotes around here, but I've never seen an animal laying there. I stay up late and even at night I've never seen anything. This spot is right next to my driveway where there's a motion sensing light that seemingly turns on at random when there's nothing, and no one out there. I'm not sure if it's connected in any way or if it's just bad wiring. More importantly, I wanted to find a picture of the rock that had been there to post in this thread. My first thought was Google Earth. Unfortunately, I'm pretty out of the way, so there's no Google Street View here, and the satellite view was no help either. You can barely see my house through the trees, and what you can see is mostly covered by a shadow. I did have an idea though. I went back to the real estate website I found the house on, and brought up the pictures of it taken by the realtor, but unsettlingly, there's no rock in the pictures. On the subject of the realtor, anyone who's ever bought a house has seen the lock boxes they put on the doors. It's a combination box that has the key to the house in it. Usually after the house is sold, they swing by to pick up the lockbox because no one wants that thing permanently attached to their doorknob. Well, she never came back for it. I managed to get it off of the door, and it's been sitting in my kitchen for months. The second mysterious event was the stench. This only happened a few days ago as well. I was sitting down to eat a pizza that I had just cooked. I popped on a movie and was settling in for the night. I started smelling this faint odour that I couldn't put my finger on. It wasn't very strong, but was quite unpleasant. Sometimes it seemed like it might have been the pizza, then sometimes it seemed like it might have been my clothes, and other times it seemed like it might have been coming from under the couch. It was driving me crazy as I couldn't find where it was coming from, and I couldn't pin down what exactly it smelled like. It smelled vaguely like sewage, but not exactly. I spent over an hour hunting for it, but couldn't find the source. Eventually I opened a few windows and sprayed the room with air freshener. That took care of it in that room, but when I opened the door to my bedroom I was hit with a wave of the same smell, but much more powerful. I looked under my bed, in my closet, and anywhere else I could think of, but again I couldn't find the source. I gave that room the same air freshener treatment and let it air out for about an hour. Eventually it went away and I was able to go to bed. The stench hasn't come back and I still have no idea what it was. It was incredibly powerful in my bedroom, and I've never smelt anything quite like it. Very strange. The other small thing is the strange marks on the street in front of my house. I noticed these only a few days ago. They look like little scorch marks, and they're only in front of my house, none in front of the neighbours' houses, and none on the rest of the street. This might not be so mysterious. Maybe the previous owners liked to light off firecrackers or something, but it was still strange to me that these are the only ones in the community, and how they were so dense. Before I bought it, the house had been on the market for over a year, and the previous owners hadn't been living there that entire time. It seemed strange to me to just move out without a buyer lined up. The last house I bought, the owners were living there until they sold it to me. It doesn't make any sense to move out and have to pay 2 mortgages and 2 sets of taxes and utilities for over a year, unless you really don't want to be in that house. Then again, maybe they had to move for work or something. Who knows? I really don't know what to make of all this, so I thought maybe someone here might have some insight. If anyone has any further questions, I'm happy to answer them. A small update on the rock. The next thing I wanted to see is if snow would collect on the spot the rock had been. I assumed I'd be waiting another month or so, but conveniently it snowed last night. Not a lot, but enough to see the results. Snow doesn't seem to like that spot either. Update 1. I wanted to make this update sooner, but I've been a bit under the weather and just haven't felt up to it. But at this point I feel like I need to. A lot of weird stuff has been going on, and I don't know what to make of any of it. About a week ago I was cleaning out my garage. I've been moved in here for a while, but I never got around to setting up the garage. I got it mostly clean and the floor cleared, and that's when I noticed there's a hollow spot under the floor. I noticed a huge difference between my footsteps from the centre of the garage to the edge. If you jump in the middle, you can feel the whole floor vibrate. As far as I know, this house doesn't have a basement, and there's certainly no entrance to one. I might have passed it off as a wonky foundation, but there's this closet that always rubbed me the wrong way. It's just weird. It's under the staircase, and it's exactly the place stairs to a basement would be if there were any. It smelt like shit and had a bunch of old air freshener containers on the floor. The weirdest thing is the light. It has a wire connected to it, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's just a dead wire that's been cut off and no switch anywhere. Not to mention the position of the light makes no sense. It's wedged in the back about 2 feet off the floor. It's completely weird and nonsensical, unless you imagine it lighting basement stairs. That being said, it's mostly just weird. What freaked me out was what happened a few days ago. I was sprawled out sick on the couch watching a movie when I heard my cat growling. I ignored it at first, but she wouldn't stop, so I rolled off the couch and went to see what her problem was. She was just staring at the door to the closet, looking scared and growling. I shooed her away and was too freaked out to open the door. Since then, I've woken up to the door being open on its own 3 times now. The stench has also been back. It hasn't been anywhere near as strong, but it's been around and I still can't pinpoint it. The spot where the rock was is still barren. No leaves, no snow, no nothing, just an empty patch of dirt. The other weird thing was the massive chemtrail. I don't buy into the whole chemtrail thing, but this was odd. It was huge and right over my house, and planes don't fly here. I've never seen or heard an airplane fly over this area, and it was no different that day. I just went outside, looked up, and saw this thing. It doesn't look like any natural cloud I've ever seen, and like I said, I didn't hear or see anything that might have made it. I live in an HOA, but you would never know it. People's yards and houses are a mess. The only reason I bring it up is because it has security, and every night at about midnight, 1 o'clock, for about a month now, one of the security cars drives past my place and stops right across the street for a few minutes, and then moves on. There's a vacant house next door that's been on the market for longer than what mine was. People keep showing up, 3 or 4 cars at a time, and it doesn't look like they're interested in the house. They drive up, get out, ignore the house, and stand in a circle and talk for about half an hour or so, and then leave. I don't know what to make of any of this. I don't believe in the supernatural, or aliens, or government conspiracies, but there's just too much weird shit going on. Maybe the cloud is nothing. Maybe the closet is nothing. Maybe the security car and groups of people next door are nothing. Maybe all of it is nothing. All I know is I've never lived anywhere where so many questionable things happen on a constant basis, and I feel very uncomfortable and on edge all the time. Does anyone have any thoughts here? This is getting beyond my capacity to rationalize. I'm not superstitious, nor am I religious or spiritual, and I don't really believe in ghosts, but there is one thing that happened to me a few years ago that I still get creeped out about. For some background, I used to be an avid lucid dreamer. I'd have lucid dreams whenever I could, and I'd keep a dream journal. I was abused by my third-grade teacher, and as a result I have had nightmares every night for the last 20 years. And being able to control the dream to switch it to something nice was a vast quality of life improvement for me, especially because I get about double the amount of REM sleep as the average person. This dream I had actually made me stop lucid dreaming entirely. I also want to clarify that I spend a lot of time learning about dreams and what happens when we sleep, like how the part of our brains that control logic is low activity during normal dreams, and that's why your dreams are weird, and waking this part up is crucial to having lucidity in dreams. My point is, I don't consider dreams mystical or anything. I see them as any other normal body function. I also want to state that I do sometimes experience sleep paralysis, and although terrifying in the moment, I don't find any spookiness in it, because I know the scary shit I see when it happens isn't real. I don't find scary dreams scary after I wake up either. I know they are just dreams. The one I'm about to tell you about, though, has always given me a more than a dream vibe, which is why it is so unsettling for me. It's the only dream I've ever had that gives me this feeling. Before you read this, I hope you don't find it a letdown. There are no jump scares or spooky screams or demons writing in blood on the walls. It might even seem mundane, so here goes. It takes place in a location I had seen in many of my dreams. It's a back road in the woods, the kind where the tire tracks make two lines in the grass. It's always fall here, and the trees are always golden and leaf litter is plentiful. There's a house here that lines up with the road. It's like a semi-nice mix between a mobile home and a plantation-style house. It's off-white, single-story, not very big, and all the windows have opaque white curtains drawn so you can't see inside. I always knock on the door of this dwelling and never get an answer. Sometimes I try to open it. This is a good time to note that these dreams were semi-lucid. I have some control, but I am not fully aware I am dreaming. The door is always locked. I find the forest relaxing though, and I go to this place because I can find interesting items. Mostly animal bones, wasp nests, shed snake skins and gemstones or cool rocks. All these things I like to collect in real life as I found them beautiful. I promise I'm not edgy or a witch. I also like and collect flowers, tiny cactus, handmade plant pots, and my day job is making soft beds for small animals like guinea pigs and ferrets. So one night I returned back to this location. I knocked on the door and got no reply. I start walking around in front of the house collecting things into a little basket. I do this for maybe a few minutes, and then the door opens. This is the first time this has ever happened. A big, tall guy comes out, and he's wearing a clean white apron. He doesn't have a shirt on, but he is wearing pants. He does have a face, but I literally cannot understand it. I look at it and think it's weird, but I can't even begin to try and explain his face to you. It's not deformed, but it is distorted, like my eyes don't work when I look at his face. He asks me what I'm doing in front of his house, so I show him my basket of things. He tells me he has a bunch of really rare, cool animal bones inside of his house, and asks if I want to come inside and take any. He doesn't give me any bad vibes. He seems really nice actually, so I say okay and start walking with him to go inside the house. My mum shows up at this point in a car. It's worth noting that my mum in my dreams always looks like my mum, but it's not her, and I am aware of this in the dream. It's always the same type of personality, so I think I have built her in my brain, and she just shows up in dreams in the body of face most familiar to me, my mum. She only shows up in nightmares and saves me or calms me down. She is not sweet or caring, it's more like it's just her job to do these things. Anyway, she shows up in the car and tells me to get in and that we need to leave right now. I don't want to leave because it feels really rude to the houseman. Like, I really feel bad for trying to leave after he was so nice to me. At first he tells me it's okay to go, so I start getting in the car. Then suddenly his demeanor completely changes and he's begging me not to leave. He gets more aggressive as it becomes clearer I am not going to change my mind and stay. He then tries grabbing me through the window to pull me out of the car, but my mum pushes him off and starts to drive away. He tries to follow the car, but eventually we drive into nothing. The whole dream just becomes black, like the only thing that exists is the car and the things inside it. I'm pretty sure the guy that came out of the house was a demon or some shit. I don't have lucid dreams anymore, because the lingering feelings from that particular dream are very unsettling and give me anxiety, and I know my lucid self would default to going to that location after I lose lucidity, and I'd rather have the nightmares than risk going back to that place. I now take a drug called topiramate to control my nightmares instead. I still dream and have nightmares, but they are less intense and no longer wake me up most of the time. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them. This dream was several years ago though, and despite having excellent dream recall, there's probably some details I simply don't remember. I lived in the suburbs of a small town in Italy until I was 19. Near my house there is a dirt road that leads to a small wood. I went to the wood with my friends a lot to play and explore when I was a kid. Before entering the wood on the side of the dirt road, there is an unfinished house, and going forward there's a country house built far from the road, but accessible through a small path. I first saw the orb when I was around 12 or 13 years old, and my friends and I were cycling to the wood on our bicycles when we decided to stop and explore the unfinished house. We went inside, but there wasn't anything interesting to see. It was just an empty house, so we decided to leave. Before making our way out of the house, I noticed some stairs that were leading to the first floor. My friends were already on the road, ready to go, except for one of them that was still in the house with me. I asked him to wait for me as I was going upstairs to see what was there. I was a little scared because the first floor was dark, but I decided to go there anyway. I took 2 steps up and I saw something on the last step. It was a new bouquet of flowers, and it looked like someone had bought it that same day and decided to dump it there. At that point I was very scared and unsure about moving forward. I took 2 to 3 more steps and I was able to see a room on the right. Inside the room there was an orb, a small white orb with a light inside floating, but it wasn't a normal LED light. That light wasn't propagating, it wasn't enlightening anything. It was contained in this small orb that wasn't moving at all. I ran downstairs and outside as soon as I saw it, and I didn't talk about it to my friends, fearing that they would make fun of me. Time passed and I forgot about it. Fast forward to when I was 15. I had started smoking weed, and I usually went to the wood alone to have a smoke in peace. Nothing ever happened in the wood, so it didn't scare me, even though the house did. Every time I went to the wood, I would run when I was passing by the house, and then forget about it. But one day I decided to explore the country house. I was high and taking everything very lightly. I went into the house through the front door, and it was just another empty house. The windows were open, so it wasn't even dark, but one room wasn't like the others. It was a room with a big door that you can see on the side of the country house. The floor and the walls in that room were burned out and totally black. There was a gas tank on the floor with some gasoline still inside it, and on one wall there was a small opening leading to a very little and totally dark room. It was maybe 5 by 1.5 meters. This little room was also burned out, and on the ground I spotted a pair of children's shoes. Suddenly a fear came over me, but it was nothing compared to the fear I felt when I looked outside. In the middle of the countryside, between the country house and the abandoned one, there was the same orb that I had seen years before. I've never ran faster in my life like I did in that moment, until a year ago when I was 18. It was a summer's night and I was hanging out with 2 friends of mine. We were bored, so we decided to go into the wood. I started to become very scared and my friends started making fun of me. I wasn't scared of the darkness, I was scared of the orb. We parked the car at the end of the paved road and decided to walk the rest of the way. We passed by the abandoned house, and it was there. It was the orb, just standing in the middle of the countryside. It was the first time I'd seen it at night, and it was totally different. It wasn't just a circular light this time. Behind the light there was the silhouette of a child. I couldn't see the face or the rest of the body, it was just a white, thin silhouette. This time my friends saw it too, because they started to run, and I followed them. I don't live there anymore. I got a high school degree and went to university in the city. But if I was there, I would have taken pictures to show you the house, the burned room, the shoes and everything. If anyone lives near there and wants to go and check, you will see exactly what I described. I've had trouble sleeping since then, and the orb haunts my dreams and my life to this day. These are my accounts of interacting with shadow people. When I first moved into my current house, it started out subtly. A noise here, a glimpse there, nothing big enough to make me suspicious. Then I had my first personal encounter while sitting in my bedroom playing video games. I felt like I was being watched from my doorway, and out of the corner of my eye I swore I could see someone peeking in. When I turned to look to see who it was, no one was there. I went to ask my mum if she had popped her head in or something. She replied by saying it was probably my mind playing tricks on me, and it was nothing. So I shrugged it off and went back to playing my games. The next encounter shook me to my core. 2 of my friends were staying over the night and we were hanging out in my bedroom, when again that same feeling of being watched prompted me to look at my doorway. There, standing the size of a giant, was a featureless black shadow in the shape of a man. My first thought and reaction was to launch myself at it in order to get between it and my friends, but when my feet hit the ground, it was gone. My friends turned to look at me with an expression like I was crazy, and I started asking them if they had seen what I'd seen. They thought I was joking around with them, but I knew it was there. It all happened so fast, but the image will forever be burned in my mind. After that, I feel like my haunting, if that's the right word to use, just got worse. The next encounter happened late one night when I was laying in bed watching TV. I'd gotten to the point where I'd decided it was time for me to turn the TV off and go to sleep. When I went to grab the remote from the side of my bed, about a foot from my face was the distinct sight of a head and 2 hands perched on my bed watching me. The seconds that encapsulated this encounter felt like hours and made my heart race. As fast as I could, I got out of my bed and tried to get away from it, but like all other instances, it just disappeared. After this, I didn't have any experiences for a few months, until my older sister and her husband moved in with us. I was in my basement watching TV. It was around 6 p.m. and the rest of my family were upstairs watching the main house TV. Suddenly I hear something coming from across the room where I was sitting that sounded like someone was trying to rip the door off the hinges and forcing it open. I flew up the stairs almost in tears, thinking my brother-in-law was pranking me, but he was asleep on the couch, along with my sisters, my mother, and my father, and there was no way he could have made it back here with how fast I got up the stairs after the door shook like it did. After this incident, there was another stretch of calm. My younger sister was the next one to experience something strange. What she'd described to my mum and I was almost word for word what happened to me when the figure watched me in my bed. My dad was next. He was outside having a bonfire. My cousin took a picture of him, and looking at it afterwards, he could see a shadow crouching behind him next to the fire. After that, my parents, mostly my mum, had the house blessed, and this seemed to stop whatever it was in my house. I still to this day see shadows out of the corner of my eye and have that feeling of being watched, but nothing as traumatic as what happened to me before. I've been a fan of this community for a long time, and I've always enjoyed reading the stories and experiences. I've always had an interest in this kind of stuff, but never had anything to post that would be of any significance. It seems like now I do, though. Firstly, a little context about me. I'm male, 21, living in the United States. I go to college and I have a pretty healthy family life. I've always been a fan of the paranormal, but always been a bit of a skeptic at the same time. I'm not a non-believer, but more of someone who tries to explain things with reason before I jump to conclusions. It all happened last night, not when I was awake, but in the depths of my subconscious mind. A dream. Now normally I am a very deep sleeper. I never really have the most vivid dreams, or at least ones that I remember clearly when I wake up the next morning. When I do have them, though, they're usually just some nonsense or something mundane like a work or school setting. They usually only include people and places that I see every day or normal settings. They're also usually choppy and incoherent. That's why the one that I had last night was so out of place. It started with me standing alone in a wooded meadow. Trees surrounding an open and grassy field. The air was warm and there was a light breeze. The sun was shining like it was about mid-morning. There was a golden hue over the entire scene, and everything seemed to be glowing. This place was quiet, serene, and a place where I was completely relaxed. I stood there in that field seemingly without a purpose, just standing, waiting for something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then there came a woman's voice, seemingly out of nowhere. It was a sweet voice, soothing and welcoming. The voice seemed to be coming from all directions, as if I was standing in the middle of a dome of speakers. Soon I was able to pinpoint where the voice was coming from. I walked forward, still not seeing where the source of the voice was, but I could hear her. Soon I saw her. An older, dark-haired woman. She had a large smile on her face. She called to me by my name. I was completely relaxed, almost as if it were my own mother calling to me to come to her. Then I realized who I was looking at. It was my grandmother on my mum's side, a woman who had been dead for 19 years, and whom I had never known after I was a toddler. Now a little bit of backstory. I never really knew my grandma on my mum's side. She died when I was only 2. Even when our lives did overlap, I never knew her. She had had a stroke in the early 90s and had lost almost all of her ability to talk and live independently. My mum and her were very close, as my grandma was a single mother and raised my mum for her entire life alone. My mum was understandably at the lowest point in her life when she lost her mother. Completely devastated by the loss of this woman who had single-handedly raised her, my mum still cries every year around the time that it would have been her birthday or an anniversary. So back to the story. I meet her and it was definitely her. She's inviting me to sit, so I do. I sit there and she tells me that she's proud of me. I then say to her, "How are you here? You're dead." She says, "I have an intermediary, a great one, but my time's almost up." Then she says, "Tell them all that I'm proud." All of this while she was stroking my hair, something that I would do to her before she died. Then I wake up crying with tears streaming down my face. I'm not a crier, so I know that this was a weird experience. Now here's why I believe that this isn't just a random dream and could actually be something from the spiritual realm. This isn't the first time that I believe to have been contacted by her. I'm too young to remember this, but my mum loves to tell the story. It was when I was 3 years old. We were still dealing with the aftermath of her death. My parents were in the middle of a very tough wrongful death lawsuit with the doctor that let her brain bleed for 8 hours in the hospital before ordering a scan. the bleed that ultimately killed her. So needless to say that my mum was going through it pretty hard. She was sitting on her bed in her room with the door closed, crying on the end of her bed. Then 3-year-old me toddles in. My mum picks me up and gives me a hug. That's when I began to talk. "Mummy, she's okay." I say this and my mum was instantly shaken. She asks me what I mean and I tell her that Baba, what 3-year-old me called my grandma, had been in my room and told me that she was okay and that she was happy. Now I would have been skeptical about this, but a few things just didn't add up in order to explain this. My mum and dad purposely never talked about the death or the case around toddler me. They never wanted to scare me or make me sad. Second, I was 3 and death was a concept that I really hadn't grasped yet, and so I don't think that I would have made any of this up in my head. I 100% believe that the experience that happened to me when I was 3 was my recently departed grandmother using me as a messenger to get the message that she was okay to her daughter that needed it the most. So now we're back to what happened last night. Is this my grandmother contacting me again nearly 20 years later? I've never dreamt about her before, and the fact that this dream was so vivid and took place in such a strange place leads me to think that something out of the spirit realm contacted me to pass on another message. Also, why would I wake up uncontrollably crying? It's never happened to me before, and is one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me. Should I tell my mum about this experience, or should I just keep it to myself? I know it would make her really happy to hear, but it still just kind of feels weird to me. Thank you for reading, and I appreciate any thoughts or advice that you all have for me. This happened almost 3 weeks ago, but the thought of it popped into my head, so I posted it on here. My dad recently bought a trailer from a lady who had inherited it from her now deceased father. My dad paid her in cash, and once it was in our hands, things started getting a little fucked up, shall we say. After handing it over to us, we noticed she had taken only a few things from inside. She'd left the beds and the refrigerator. She'd even left a Twix. There was still food in the refrigerator, and other things like paintings and books, etc., were still dotted about the place. While I was looking around at all of these abandoned possessions, I noticed many strange and weird things, like loose flooring and stains, and I found masses, and I mean masses, of dead bugs in the window corners. There must have been like thousands of these bugs, in what seemed almost ball-like shapes. It was weird, but seemed basically normal for someone who just didn't clean. But here comes the creepy part. My dad and some other people were tearing up the floor one day, and my dad had to go to the hardware store for more materials. I was then left there alone to work on plucking out staples from the ground of the base flooring. I had a radio on, and it was right next to this strange-looking chair that my dad had decided he wanted to keep. I was working and listening to the music when I noticed this rocking chair suddenly move. I was a little shocked, but didn't think much of it and carried on working. Then, as my back was starting to hurt a bit, I decided to take a break and went into the kitchen to sit down. Then suddenly the radio just switches off. I was pretty scared for a second, then I just turned it back on and went to rest again. I'm not even halfway back to the kitchen when it changes to a different radio station. I turned it off, and by now I'm freaking the fuck out. Then I hear 3 very clear, loud footsteps coming from the bathroom. They sounded like gunshots. I bolted out of the front door into the front yard. Just for some information, there are 2 exits and entrances into this trailer park, and the other is in my view, so there was no way anyone had gotten in there without me noticing, and there's no way that anybody could have left either, since all of the windows are locked. If someone had wanted to get out, you would have to break them. I just waited until my dad and his friends got back before doing anything else. I didn't tell them what had happened. That was the last time I went in that trailer. The guest bedroom was fixed up for me when I was to stay there, but that was never going to happen. A few days later, they were in there fixing up a loose board. When they broke it off, they found mouldy children's clothes behind it, along with a collection of animal skulls, one of which seemed to be belonging to a human child. Fuck. They all had traces of what I can only guess to be dry blood. I almost threw up thinking about it. I'm never going to stay the night there, ever. This happened back in 2010. I was 10 and living with my cousins at the time. During this time, there was a blizzard that hit our city out of nowhere. Our weather is known to have bipolar tendencies, and we have late winters. This blizzard went on for a while. It was thick snow and was freezing. It was so unexpected that no one was prepared for it. Power was out, and people were buying out the water supplies in stores. I remember seeing on the news that people were using barbecue grills inside homes for warmth. This mainly occurred in poorer areas, and even though we lived in apartments, we were fortunate enough to have our power on and have other stuff that we needed. To sum up how this blizzard was affecting us, it was so cold that trees were falling. I lived on a giant pond, where if you go out onto our balcony, it would be water. It was completely frozen, and me being the 10-year-old I am, wanted to go play in the snow. Who doesn't want to play in snow? So me and my cousin, who was 18 at the time, played out in the snow all day. We practically did that every day whenever we got bored. But one day we both went out into the parking lot outside my apartment, which was basically in front of my home. The only difference this time was we went to go play in the snow at 6 p.m, and it was already dark by this time because of daylight savings. We waited until it had stopped snowing before we went out. We're playing as we normally do, building snowmen and stuff. We decided to attempt to make a snow wall, so we needed lots of snow for that. It had been snowing heavily, and where is the best spot to get a load of snow? Of cars that haven't moved, of course. We started building the wall, and I'm taking snow off of trunks of cars, as there's thick layers. It's the easiest spot to obtain a chunk of snow. After a few back and forths of getting snow off cars and bringing it to the wall we were building, I notice I haven't touched my sister's boyfriend's car yet. Wow, that's a lot of snow, as they haven't left in a few days. We're walking towards my sister's boyfriend's car. We're standing at the trunk of the car, and as soon as I grab a big 2 arms full of snow, a very loud click is heard. In my confusion, I look around and then look down and around the car. My cousin and I see a green light in the shape of a circle surrounding us. Freaked out, I decided to look up to see what the source of this light was. There was nothing above us. So after noticing the light and nothing above us, I look at my cousin and start running home. I'm totally freaked out, and as I'm running, I'm looking around everywhere, checking my surroundings. As I do, I see a tree fall in the distance. It was because of the cold, as I'd mentioned earlier, and it was common during this little blizzard. But for this to happen, at the moment of this weird phenomenon, adds more chills to the story for me. My cousin and I get inside the house, and my sister and his sister are cooking together. We rush in, freaked out, and they're asking what's going on with us. We explain the chain of events that went down, and just like anyone who hears these types of stories, they said we were crazy and we need to stop playing. Okay, they don't believe us. For the rest of that night, my cousin and I just kept peeking out of the window every so often as our minds couldn't clear of what had happened. We stayed up all night shaking and kept peeking out of the window. We played Black Ops all night until 7 a.m, still periodically peeking out the window every 5 minutes or so. This was not something we were going to forget, let alone make up. To this day, we both still remember this incident clearly. A moment that should have been normal fun turned into a creepy extraterrestrial sighting, which I totally believe. I am 18 now, but the details are still clear to this day, as I have thought about it often, ever since that moment. My cousin and I talk about this once in a while, when we see each other. But man, oh man, what a freaky incident. I don't expect you to believe me, but I've had this on my mind for way too long. It's just something too unreal to keep to myself. What are your thoughts? What could it have been? Why did it target us? Why didn't it do anything to us? To this day, I have too many unanswered questions, and they will never be answered. and I'm just going to have to live with that. Thank you for reading. Hey fearsome friends, I'm back from vacation and I had a wonderful time. If you could like, share and subscribe, that would really help me. And if you're interested in early access, you can join my Patreon, which is in the description below. Also, if you have any stories that you want to submit, then send them to my email, missfearsome83@hotmail.com. Thank you all again for supporting my channel, and remember, keep being creepy.